Hey there, welcome back to the macroeconomic unit we're doing here. Today we're going to really delve into graphs and concepts that are going to be the building blocks later on. Part 1 is really about setting everything up and more complicated lessons later on, so it is important that you understand everything right now. For this lesson, we're going to be covering the microeconomic concepts of supply and demand. This will help us when we learn about the macroeconomic equivalent, which is aggregate supply and demand. Anyway, let's begin. We're going to begin by talking about the production possibilities frontier, or PPF if you don't have much time. Drawing it, we see it's, a curve. Our two axes are going to be guns and butter. A bit odd, but that's what normally is used as an example in economics if you search it up on Google, for example, so no need to go against convention. So here is our graph. Now, what the PPF curve represents is how much an economy can produce efficiently. Any of these points on the curve are the economy at max sustainable efficiency. We will also cover the long-run aggregate supply curve when we cover aggregate supply, so just keep that in the back of your head that they both represent an efficient economy in the long run. Let's choose one point, A. What A represents is basically how we are allotting our resources to produce these two different goods, butter and guns. Because we only have a limited number of resources, remember scarcity, we have to decide how to use those goods. Remember the three economic questions. Using a diagram, we can show how things might look at point A. As you can see, we are producing much more guns than butter. That means we are allocating more of our resources, our factories' labor towards that goal. Let's look at another point, point B. At point B, we are producing more butter and less guns, so we can see how that changes our allocation of resources. Because of this, we can examine some points that are not on the curve. Here, point C is beyond our current production capabilities. It is unstable. Maybe people aren't getting enough time to sleep, maybe they are being overworked. Either way, this isn't sustainable. On the other side of the coin, point D is inefficient. If the economy is at this point, it's probably in a recession. The unemployment rate is higher than the natural rate. People don't have jobs, and factories are producing less. Now, some things to realize about the PPF curve. First of all, an actual economy would produce many more goods than just guns and butter. It would have thousands of dimensions, not just two, but because that's hard to represent, normally we just stick with two to get the idea of it. Second, it is also important to realize that economic growth, permanent economic growth that is not a movement along the curve as is the transition from A to B. It is actually the curve getting bigger as shown. It is important to know what things would cause a movement along the curve and what would actually cause economic growth. This is going to be something which will be brought back with all the graphs we do for the rest of the unit. A movement from A to B may be caused because we are heading into war and the country wants to produce more guns and less butter. An expansion of the curve could be if we win the war and gain new lands and new factories, but the curve could also shrink if our factories got destroyed or we lost land. Finally, for the PPF curve, we need to look at opportunity cost. This is the general idea that there is a cost to anything. If you choose to watch a movie instead of study for a test, you may be happier, but you will also probably get a worse grade on the test. In the context of a PPF curve, it's the idea that for every extra good you produce, you have to give up a certain amount of the other good. To explain this, I'm going to borrow the example Sal uses in Khan Academy, which is rabbits and berries. So there are three ways this could go. We either have increasing opportunity cost, decreasing opportunity cost, or opportunity cost is fixed. So let's go in order. First, we have increased opportunity cost. Let's say at point A, if we devote most of our energy to getting berries and the rest to catching rabbits, we get 40 berries and 1 rabbit. However, let's say tomorrow we decide we want more rabbits, so we spend more time catching rabbits and less time getting berries. Let's say today we can get 2 rabbits and 35 berries. So what was the opportunity cost? Well, to get 1 more rabbit, we gave up 5 berries. So our opportunity cost for that 1 rabbit is 5 berries. In terms of berries, our opportunity cost is 1 berry for 1/5 of a rabbit. Now let's say the next day, I want to get even more rabbits. I managed to get 3 rabbits, but I had to go for the harder to catch ones in order to get that many, so I only got 25 berries because I had less time. So what was the opportunity cost there? Well, in that case, because the extra rabbit took me more time than normal because I had to go for the harder ones, I gave up 10 more berries than yesterday, cost increased. Maybe the day after that, I go for the most skilled rabbit, so I have little time to get berries. I get 5 berries. So the opportunity cost increased even more. That's what we call increasing opportunity cost, and this is how it is shown on the PPF curve. Each rabbit got progressively harder to catch, and we had to give up more and more berries every time. I hope you understood, because if you can understand increasing opportunity cost, then it becomes easier to understand the other two. Decreasing opportunity cost, as you may guess, means that each rabbit would be easier to catch. Let's go back to the first day. I get 40 berries in 1 rabbit. Maybe tomorrow I still want to get more rabbits, so I get 30 berries and 2 rabbits. However, the next day when I want to get 3 rabbits, maybe my hunting skills improve. Maybe I can catch them in a group, so catching the third rabbit is easier compared to the second than the second was to the first. So I get 25 berries and 3 rabbits. By the fourth rabbit, maybe I have a whole system of traps because I'm catching enough to justify the work of making them. So I can get 4 rabbits and 22 berries. Each time the opposite happens. It gets easier for me to catch each consecutive rabbit. Finally, for an opportunity cost that remains the same, like in this graph, it doesn't get easier or harder. I can get 1 rabbit and 40 berries, the next day I can get 2 rabbits and 35 berries, the third day I get 3 rabbits and 30 berries. The opportunity cost remains the same. We will build off this in the mini lesson that's coming after this video, so if you don't understand, I have linked the Khan Academy video in the description, go check it out. Alright, now that we have that done, we can move on to the focus of today's lesson, supply and demand. Now I'm sure you know these terms, but once again, supply is basically the amount of goods producers are selling, and demand is the amount of goods consumers are buying. While it might seem obvious, it is important to understand the basic idea that producers want to sell at the highest price possible to get the most profit, and consumers want to buy at the lowest price possible to save the most money. A lot of economics is explaining common sense things in hard to understand terms, so stick with me here. There are things you call substitute goods and complementary goods as well. Substitute goods are things you can use as an alternative. If the price of apples is very high, people can just buy pears or oranges or other types of fruit. Insulin does not have a substitute good, which we will expand on later, and what the results are because of that. Complement goods are goods that are related to the use of another good. A good example is printer ink and printers. An important deduction from this is when demand of a good goes up, the demand of its substitute will probably go down, and the demand of its complementary good, if it has one, will go up with it. So with that background, you should be able to understand the law of supply and the law of demand. The law of supply is that when prices go up, suppliers want to sell more. This goes back to our idea that producers want to sell at the highest price. If prices go up, suppliers are going to dedicate more capital and effort towards making and selling that good because it earns them more profit. Likewise, if the price of a good goes down, the opposite will happen. A misconception some people have is that the law of supply is that more goods lead to lower prices. This is true, but it isn't the law of supply. That happens because either the good isn't as scarce anymore, or producers have overestimated demand and thus have to cut back and lower prices to sell inventory. Now, the law of demand states that as prices go down, demand goes up, and vice versa. Again, consumers want to buy at the lowest price possible, so it makes sense. However, the slope of the curve can be varied based on the product. This is because of elastic and inelastic goods. Elastic goods are things where a change in price leads to a relatively big change in demand. These are things like luxury goods. You also have inelastic goods, where a change in price doesn't really change demand much. Insulin is needed to live. It's a form of medication. Without it, people would die. So increasing or decreasing the price doesn't change much because demand is fixed. This is why there's such a big debate about pharmaceutical companies, for instance, because they sell an inelastic good, medication, and they have been increasing the price dramatically because of a lack of government regulation. Supply can also be elastic, however. Anyway, let's graph these two, supply and demand. We will draw two axes. The x-axis will be quantity and the y-axis will be price. Notice how the x-axis stands for both quantity supplied and quantity demanded. This might seem confusing, but you'll understand. So we have both of these graphs. Supply upward sloping and demand downward sloping. Make sure you understand these graphs. Just pause the video and make sure you completely understand why these graphs are how the way they are. As price increases along the y-axis, demand on the x-axis goes down and supply on the x-axis goes up. Okay? Good, then let's put these two together. Now you have the supply and demand curve, one of the most important graphs in economics. Let's look at a few points on the curve and see what they represent. Point A is indicating a high quantity supplied, but a low quantity demanded. This is because at the price it is selling at, it is very much worth it to sell the good for producers, but it is not worth spending the money to buy it for consumers. Suppliers are going to soon realize that no one is buying their product. This is called a surplus, when supply is greater than demand. So let's say they reduce the price and cut down the amount they are producing. The graph reaches point B, where at the price, supply is low but demand is very high. At this price, producers aren't making much money when they sell the good, so they aren't producing a lot of it. It doesn't make financial sense for them. But at that price, a lot of people are willing to buy because it's cheap. That's what we call a shortage, when there isn't enough supply to meet demand. So let's say they decide to raise prices and increase supply to meet the market. Finally, we reach point C, where supply meets demand. This is called market equilibrium. At this price, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. Suppliers are making money and selling most to all of their goods. Markets tend to shift towards this point of market equilibrium over time. So that's supply and demand explained to you. After lesson 2, where we talk about GDP and a lot of stuff related to it, we will come back to the idea of aggregate demand in supply. There we will do more complicated stuff with this graph, so it should be interesting. Either way, today's lesson is finished. Let's review. We covered the production possibilities curve, opportunity cost, supply and demand, the law of supply and demand, and the supply and demand curve. We will return in our next video, our first mini lesson, where we will talk about specialization and diminishing returns, concepts that will build off opportunity cost. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe. If you have any questions or you're still confused about the topic, I'll link some of the Khan Academy videos down in the description below, and I'll see you later.